The Coast Guard apparently approved 74 exemptions allowing BP to use the chemicals during a 7-week span, and that was after the EPA said that the chemicals had to be used sparingly. BP admits pouring 1.8 million gallons of dispersant into the ocean, and it's a number that's being disputed by our next guest, Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who said that what BP has done amounts to a carpet bombing of the Gulf. Thanks for joining us this morning, Congressman.
Thank you for having me on.
You know, and even when we were down there back on day 37, all of us were raising questions about just what exactly, how much they knew about the effect and the impact of these dispersants. Now we're 1.8 million gallons. That's what they're saying at this point. It could be far more. And you likened it to carpet bombing. But the stuff was approved by the EPA. They said it was okay to use. What are your biggest concerns about it?
Well, the EPA actually said that dispersants, these chemicals, should be used when spraying the surface of the ocean only in rare instances. What it turns out happened is that BP, for all intents and purposes, sprayed just about every single day. And on some days, they did so in quantities which were far in excess of anything that reports that they were giving to the Coast Guard indicated that they were using. The EPA, in fact, was concerned about the impact that this could have upon workers. They were concerned about the impact that these chemicals could have upon marine life in the Gulf of Mexico. But the EPA ultimately was not the agency that decided whether or not these chemicals were sent into the ocean or onto the ocean's surface. That was a decision made by the Coast Guard. And so even though there was an agreement in late May that the EPA led that it would be used only rarely, as the weeks and months went by, it turned out that it was used on an almost daily basis. And that's why we have to ensure that internal bleeding inside of this ocean is monitored very closely to make sure that we understand what the ramifications are of having this unprecedented scientific experiment be conducted.
News 5 is doing some testing of our own. More than a week has passed since Alabama beaches have seen significant oil. And for the most part, the water looks okay. While it may be tempting to take a quick dip, you may think twice after seeing this report. It's a News 5 investigation testing the waters. We want to get a sample just over here where there are people actually in the water.
Our News 5 investigation took us from Gulf Shores to Orange Beach, to Katrina Key, to the Dolphin Island Marina. We collected samples of water, sand, and when we saw kids digging...
Do you mind if we get some water out of your sand hole here?
We got a sample of that, too. To our eye, the water looked pretty normal until we took those samples to a lab.
When testing for oil or grease, how much would be normal on the beach?
I wouldn't think that you'd find very much on the beach. There's no real normal amount. Normal is non-detected.
Bob Naiman is a chemist with nearly 30 years of experience. He tested our water and sand for oil and petroleum. Naiman says he wouldn't expect to see any more than 5 parts per million of the greasy stuff. But when he started testing the water, this is what he found. The first sample, taken just off Katrina Key, tested positive for more than 3 times that, 16 parts per million of oil and petroleum. The second sample was water from Orange Beach. Here we saw light sheen, and the test confirmed, coming back with 29 parts per million. In Gulf Shores, we came across some kids digging in the sand, some 20 yards from any waves.
You mind if I get a sample of your water?
But even there, the sample came back 51 parts per million. The numbers keep getting higher. Gulf Shores beach water, right where people were swimming, showed 66 parts per million. And the sand, where beachgoers are walking, has 211 parts per million. The sixth sample was a spot in Orange Beach where, again, we found kids playing. And we found our highest content of oil and petroleum, 221 parts per million. But the tests didn't stop there. The sample we haven't yet told you about is the one collected from Dolphin Island Marina near some boom, which we can only imagine's been handled by cleanup workers. When Naaman added an organic solvent to separate the oil from the water, just like he did with all the other samples, this sample exploded right in his lab.
I mean, like almost instantaneous. Actually, maybe 1 second. It's just weird.
The results surprised even our chemist.
We think that it most likely happened due to the presence of either methanol or methane gas or the presence of the dispersant Corexit.
Unfortunately, the sample was destroyed in the explosion, so we'll have to get more and do a different kind of test to get to the bottom of what's in it.
There are two things that we can take away from the test we did. First, even if you don't see oil on the beach or in the water, chances are it's there. All of our tests from Orange Beach to Dolphin Island showed an abnormal presence of oil. And second, while we don't know exactly what caused that Dolphin Island Marina sample to explode, it has certainly caught our interest. News 5 will test that water for chemicals, specifically chemicals linked to the dispersant being used in the Gulf, Corexit.
Some new findings, preliminary findings that reveal that those orange droplets found in tens of thousands of tiny blue crab larvae are characteristic of the controversial oil dispersants. New findings back up the concern the dispersant BP used so widely may do more harm than the oil itself.
I was more concerned about the Corexit than the oil also.
Now, researchers say it appears they've detected a Corexit sort of fingerprint in these orange blobs found lodged in the bodies of tiny blue crab larvae collected from marshes that stretch from Texas to Florida.
We're at unprecedented volumes of dispersant used so far.
And that's what UNO's Martin O'Connell, who studies aquatic organisms that move through the water, says is the problem, that the volume of the EPA's pre-approved dispersant used to break down the oil probably turned it into small droplets, making it easy to find its way under a shell.
If you're a small fish and you eat 1,000 of these crab larvae and all of them have oil or Corexit drops in them, they could get into the fish, that little fish could be eaten, and so on and so on.
New Orleans attorneys representing fishermen and cleanup workers who have left boats because they're sick have hired experts to test air and water quality samples. A toxicologist out of Florida found that some of these chemicals are in great excess of risk-based lethal levels, that the current hydrocarbon levels are capable of sterilizing our fisheries and estuary production zones. Because so many fish and crabs feed on crab larvae, some scientists fear the oil and dispersant droplets threaten to kill critical areas in the Gulf food web.
A pair of fishermen in Mississippi make an alarming discovery that has many wondering what's happening below the surface in the Gulf. Full-size crabs filled with some sort of black substance. They were pulled from waters near the mouth of Bay St. Louis. Shelley Brown has the story from Hancock County.
In Mississippi, people are happy something is finally working to kill the well in the Gulf for good.
Look, see out here, look, there's a great big one. See that big one next to the rock?
And while it's tough to find oil on the surface, Hancock County EMA Director Brian Adams says it's there, you just can't see it.
But we're still seeing tar balls every day. And I'm not talking just a few tar balls. We're seeing a good amount every day on the beaches.
A rock jetty near Waveland was covered in about 1,000 pounds of tar balls in just 3 days. And now there's been a disturbing discovery inside several full-size crabs near the mouth of Bay St. Louis.
Crab, you could tell it was real slick and dark in color. So they didn't know, about the crab. So I grabbed it and opened the back of the crab, and you could see in the dead man, or the lungs of the crab, you could see the black.
Longtime seafood supplier Keith Ladner says he's never seen anything like it. A crab's lungs, normally a white or grayish color. He says a crab would have to be extremely old and deteriorated to look like this.
It wasn't that case. The meat was intact, but the lungs were in bad shape.
Through the vessels of opportunity, Robert Main has started pulling boom on the bottom and believes that's where this is coming from.
We would slow down, let it go to the bottom, and in 10-minute pulls that we had made, it was just saturated with brown, solid brown substance.
And this is where these crabs live?
Correct.
On the bottom?
Right, on the bottom.
That's right.
And a lot of other marine life
Sure, everything feeds off the bottom.
Nothing but a bottom dweller.
You know, it's shocking to me that the shrimp season opened up just about a week ago, and these shrimp traveling across the bottom just like the crab.
Oyster fishermen are alarmed at what they're finding in Elwha Bay, an area that once again is open to fishing. This afternoon they showed us the disturbing state of oysters from beds that once provided their livelihoods. Liz Reyes has that story.
Well, the private oyster grounds we visited is about a 45-minute boat ride southeast of Wyclowski. And the fishermen we spoke to say state officials need to re-examine some of these grounds which have officially been reopened.
See the blackness in there? That's not normal.
Black-brown slime is what Corky Robin is finding on oysters dredged from waters in Elwha Bay. That's southeast of Wyclowski. These are waters which have provided oysters for his family's seafood business for almost 70 years.
It could be oil. It's a mixture of oil. It's probably a mixture of oil and disbursement and whatever.
The oysters are from a private oyster ground now reopened for commercial fishing. The state says safety tests show there's no problem here. But these veterans have their doubts, and they say it's not just here.
Pretty much everywhere we've been, everywhere we checked, same thing.
What also really concerns them is what they're not seeing when they take a closer look at these oyster shells. Usually this time of year they are full of little baby oysters. Instead they're finding empty shells like this and this one, which means the babies have died, and that, they say, does not bode well for the future of this industry.
He believes a slimy coating is preventing baby oysters from attaching and staying alive on the shells. Right now, Louisiana oyster reefs are comprised of private and public ones. The public grounds are controlled by the state and remain shut down. But close to 40% of the private grounds are now open, like this section owned by Nick Zarak. But he says given the conditions of the oysters, he will not sell these.
But I'm scared because all this black stuff on oysters, I'm scared to sell them.
Sad uncertainty over what is on the oysters and what may have penetrated them that has these fishermen against commercial fishing of oysters until they get more answers on the potential harm of eating these.
And state wildlife officials maintain any area reopened underwent a series of safety tests before, and nothing came up negative. They say they don't know the long-term implications of the oil spill, and nothing came up negative, and nothing came up negative, and nothing came up negative. But they encourage fishermen to report if they see anything unusual to the State Wildlife and Fisheries Department.
From the Huffington Post, scientists have found signs of an oil and dispersant mix under the shells of blue crab larvae in the Gulf of Mexico due to the 1.8 million gallons of dispersant that BP used. BP sprayed dispersant onto the surface of the slick and into the jet of oil and gas as it erupted out of the wellhead a mile beneath the surface. As a result, less oil reached the surface and the Gulf's fragile coastline, but more remained under the surface. Fish, shrimp, and crab larvae, which float around in the open seas, are considered the most likely to die on account of exposure to the subsea oil plumes. Susan Shaw, director of the Marine Environmental Research Institute, said, quote, "Corexit is in the water column, just as we thought, and it is entering the bodies of animals, and it's probably having a lethal impact there." She said the dispersant is like a delivery system for the oil.